I mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. That's healthy.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like. I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be here and be your host. Can I get a quick, the mic is working this time. We got it set this time. I don't know what happened Saturday. That was crazy. But peace, if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, and welcome everybody to the remixers and everybody filing in now. Good morning, Monday morning to you. To those who will see and hear this later, peace to you as well. Please do like, share, subscribe, support our Patreon. We are 9 days away from exiting our demonetized wilderness state. So shout out to everybody who has helped keep us afloat, so to speak. And please continue to do so. We have a great show for you this morning, a great way to start what may be off to not a great week. A couple things before I bring up our guests, just very quickly. There was the shooting Saturday evening, not far from where I live at ColumbiaMall, where a young 17-year-old lost his life, apparently over an argument, and was shot in the head in the food court. In what is not supposed to, in what is in an area often considered to be, I think even voted recently, not too long ago, to be the best place to live in Howard County, here in Howard County, Maryland. And I just wanted to quickly show what were some of the what I thought was just a little bit of the interesting responses that were on Twitter to the report when it was announced by the Howard County Police. So to the young man and his family, all love and respect, rest in power. I don't know the details. I don't know the young man, but just seems like an amazing overreaction. I can't find the tweet real quick that I just had saved. So sorry about that delay. But here we go. Let me stop that. Share this here real quick. Howard County Police Department, one person is deceased after being shot during an altercation. They were quick to make sure it was understood it was not an active shooter situation or anything like that. As of now, they've still not found the assailant, and not much more has been said. But I just thought some of these tweet reactions were very interesting. Joking reference to the sign saying no weapons are allowed. This one, no, that wasn't it. Elections have consequences. I thought that was an interesting. And then there was another one. Where's the one that said something about we know who it was, but it was one of those. It was perfect for a Howard County response. That is the kind of racism we might get here in Columbia, Maryland. It was one of those. We all know who really it's all about, but though nothing was said about who, and then it was said. Somebody in response to this said, if there's no description, we know, oh, here it is, BLM, it's Black Lives Matter. And then when there's no description, that tells you the description. Now, my unscientific media analysis and approach has always on this issue has always been, when they don't give you a description, the assailant is white. But I don't think that was the intent of usually if the suspect is black or brown, they're very happy to put that out there. But my bad. There was another one where it was the typical kind of, we don't know who it was, but we know who it was type of thing that you might get around here. But it was just a wild story. And then speaking of that, just very quickly, the wild race thing, I did see the series Presumed Innocent on Apple TV, which I thought was kind of funny in the sense that I saw one of the reasons why I ended up watching it, and it turned out to be good. I thought it was, for the most part, well done, but was that I was seeing all this backlash, at least in the headlines of YouTube videos, saying that DEI ruined the film because it was the series was a remake of the 1990 Harrison Ford film. Spoiler alert warning here. If you are, in the original, the wife is the one who ends up they think it's Harrison Ford, but it turns out to be his wife killing his lover. In the series, it's the mixed race daughter, because Jake Gyllenhaal is married to a black woman, and they have one moment. They have a couple instances where there's an interesting moment in the series where, because of the son of the accusation of Gyllenhaal for killing his colleague, the sort of trickle down racial aspect of it will be that his children will face a backlash, and he's not clear of this kind of backlash. And there's a line where the wife has to say to him, "Sometimes I think you forget that your son is black." And I thought that was interesting. And then when I saw some of the headlines on so as I'm seeing these headlines and some of these YouTube videos saying that DEI and diversity have ruined the original, I thought that's interesting because in this, the wife is not guilty, though he thinks she is. And it turns out to be the daughter that he ends up covering for. So I thought that was a little bit interesting. And somehow I overlapped those two as I was reading some of the responses on Twitter, albeit the one I couldn't find there, to the shooting, that it's that sort of Get Out styled affluent middle class racism that we end up getting a lot of times that has to be sussed out. So thought that was interesting. All right. Just those couple of things I wanted to mention very quickly. And obviously we will be following some other things and staying involved in some other things. But oh wait, what was I? Italy, PG County bartending, and CO. What were my notes here for? Have to come back to that. So my next guest has been, you know what? Let's just take a quick break, and I'll come back and we'll bring our guest up that way.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
So our next guest is the author of this new memoir. He has been on the program a number of times, and someone who was an activist, a journalist, a hacktivist, and a political prisoner, and has written this fascinating new memoir called My Glorious Defeats, Hacktivist, Narcissist, Anonymous, a memoir of Barrett Brown. And Barrett joins us once again. Barrett, welcome back to the show. Good to see you again. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm doing great, actually.
Right on, right on. Look, man, this again, as usual, particularly lately, I have not finished the entire book, but it is fascinating. It is well written. It is, I think, so far at least, a very exciting, even inspiring read. I skipped to the end to read your conclusion, as I usually do, and a couple things in the middle. And there's a lot that I would like for us to talk about in the time that we have. And then we'll probably have to have a series of conversations going forward just to get through all that you've brought up here. But let me just invite you to give your initial, what is your overview of what you've done here, and what is it that you hope to convey, and or anything else that you would want to say to us about this memoir, and some introductory comments.
Sure. The thing to keep in mind about the book itself, and about my public presence as well, is that you'll see different newspapers, outlets claiming it's about different things, claiming it's a prison memoir, claiming that it's about my hacks, my career as a hacker, which I'll get into that in a bit. It's surprisingly bizarre reviews for this book from Kirkus, the publishing industry outlet. What it's really about, what all this is really about, is two things: the media and the police, and the intersection between those two things. And by police, I also include the intelligence community. Those are the most useful subjects I can talk about. Those are the things that I had the most documentation on, the most experience with, and which also has the greatest impact, all the more so for being opaque and not very well reported, the greatest impact on our lives, on how things have gone the last 15 years. It's about Peter Thiel, Palantir, the FBI, which he has been an asset for. They just acknowledged that about a year ago, for a long time. Those are the villains here. The sub-villains are those in the press, some of whom remain there, who have consciously, continuously lied for this man, and allowed him to get to the point where he can choose a VP. He can choose a presidential candidate. He can back him when the candidate decides he doesn't want to leave office, and he can back him when he wants to get back into office. The degree of power that Peter Thiel has reached in the last 14 years would not have been possible were it not for the ongoing complicity of extremely, I don't know if they're sociopaths or what they are, but people who occupy these positions in the press that should be occupied by actual journalists and not by FBI assets. That's what this book is about. Everything else is there's other things in there that are important and all that, but this is the fundamental issue: is information flow, the manipulation of information flow, the organic failures of information flow, whereby careerists in the press are, they're pressed on deadlines. They have editors. They have certain understandings of things, certain heuristics they operate on, and that allows for bad actors to manipulate that. These are issues that, if they're not taken seriously soon, very seriously, you'll get more of the same in the U.S. You'll have more. This collapse will be ongoing. That's what needs to be fixed.
So first of all, even in terms of some of the reviews, it's from the New York Times review that I took this quote here, the deranged, hyperbolic, and true comment, which I thought was a funny line, particularly coming from the New York Times. But if I can, let me just skip ahead, since you describe it this way. Peter Thiel, it took me a few minutes to catch up to this, that within the last couple of weeks, Terrence Howard goes back on Joe Rogan to semi-debate Eric Weinstein about what to me, in my lay understanding, seems like an inane approach to science. And they have this whole conversation that is meant to present Eric Weinstein as the logical, sound, calm, reasonable academic whose brilliance and genius has been thwarting the ruling elite for so many years. And then to read him particularly in the section of your book, Conspiracy Theories, as this Peter Thiel henchman, and remembering what you've talked about with me and others before in terms of the Peter Thiel Joe Rogan connection, and it was, and I'll admit I thought of all of that in a jumbled way as I'm presenting it now, with the hook being for what is admittedly of interest to me, the black hook, so to speak, of Terrence Howard. That Terrence Howard be that hook into an extended black and pop cultural community. Because he's sitting there not challenging Weinstein in terms of his political connections and ideological solidarity with Peter Thiel. He's over there trying to build with him on some, we're going to tear down the whole scientific community.
Joe Rogan's not in a position to do that because Joe Rogan also owes a great deal to Peter Thiel. That's why Eric Weinstein's been going on a show despite no one knowing who he was 7 or 8 years ago. That's a part of the mechanism. Just like with Andy Ngo, just like with a lot of these other guru types, the grifters across this, not just in the alt-rights and in the kind of the bro-right communities, but also parts of the left have been sort of infiltrated, captured by people that work for Thiel or David Sachs. You and I have discussed, I think, privately a few times, some of the things that have happened with other black groups in the U.S., particularly one in particular who had a person poached by David Sachs's people. And then the purpose of that is they give appeal to an audience that, 10 years ago that are not up to date on what has been exposed about these individuals. So people, an audience that considers Glenn Greenwald to be a man of honor and decency and honesty. A person who, perhaps is on the left and they're thus looking for someone who agrees with them on certain issues. In every space we find gradually, we look hard for these things. Sometimes they emerge on their own. We find all of this concerted effort over the last 15 years by Thiel, who of course was backed by the CIA, the In-Q-Tel, which is their private investment arm when he started his companies. Mithril is the one that J.D. Vance worked for. Palantir and Durrell, all named after Lord of the Rings bullshit. So they engage in capture. They engage in state capture, which is a term we're all familiar with to some extent. They engage in media capture. They engage in constituency capture. And that's going to continue because it's like playing whack-a-mole. And it's much easier for them to get someone into a constituency, to an activist space, for instance. It's much easier for them to do that than it is for us to document that. And then the hardest part, to get people to take responsibility for it. As in, it's very hard for people to acknowledge that they've been following someone who's a fraud. It's an ego issue. It's an ego barricade we're all up against. This has happened to me a number of times because because of the way this works. It's very hard for a reporter, or a journalist, an editor, a producer to acknowledge that the person they brought on to speak about activism is an FBI asset whose correspondence with the FBI has now been leaked, who are bragging in some spaces about their FBI affiliation, their work in activism. It's very hard for some of these people to acknowledge that they did that. And in other cases, it's a career issue. So people, a reporter working in this difficult ecosystem that the media has become 15 years with fewer jobs, fewer positions. It's a person who might act like a good person under certain circumstances when they're allowed to, will, when pushed, end up acting quite contrary to that. It was the peace dividend, the post-World War peace dividend. That's kind of the other issue we're up against. It's been made possible since World War II for people in the West, particularly in the U.S., to kind of forget about civics and politics as a thing. That era is ending now, but it seemed quite possible. It seemed reasonable to just sort of sit back and say, "Oh, things are crazy." This state of ours sure is acting in a terrible fashion elsewhere. And to sort of assume that can go on and that doesn't affect you and your children. Obviously, the last few years in particular, that illusion, which was partly true to some extent, but the illusory part of that has sort of disappeared. It's now clearer and clearer that there are consequences to our actions, especially if you're occupying a media space, political space, and you're acting inappropriately. It's not, the FBI is not the most dangerous thing to those of us who find ourselves up against the intelligence community or corporate intelligence or whatever is not the FBI itself, the police itself. It is media entities not taking responsibility for their actions in an ecosystem wherein they're constantly being pressured or tricked or conned or bought off in order to serve the interests of the far right, corporatist, sort of neo-fascist movement. That's what this book is about.
So you mentioned constituency capture. And I mentioned Terrence Howard being involved in that conversation as the capture of the black constituents, or an attempt. J.D. Vance is correct me if I'm wrong, the attempt to capture the working class white community with the whole hillbilly elegy fantasy and mythology that seemed a lot like the bootstrap economics that we hear targeting black people all the time. It's not a problem with the country, it's a problem with my hillbilly colleagues that the rest of them didn't go to Yale like me, type of thing. And so could you say just a little bit more, first of all, correcting anything you think I got wrong there, but in terms of the relationship between Vance and Peter Thiel, and how he's ended up, as you see it, being selected by Trump to be probably the next vice president.
Well, this is the unusual thing about this last few weeks is now a lot of the press, the better elements of the press in the U.S. are fully aware of this connection between Thiel and J.D. Vance. It's been widely reported. When I say relatively widely reported, and that could be just a function of the journalists that I do follow, here and there. But I mean that it's no longer a question. It's very, very much been accepted. Again, J.D. Vance worked for Mithril Capital, Thiel's private equity firm, or one of them. The connections go farther back from that, and the connections between J.D. Vance and FBI assets like Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson is a guy whose name people will have heard the last 8-9 years. He pops up in a lot of different sort of Baroque political areas. He's an FBI asset. He's the one who, as per last year, the article that came out, he's the one who brought Peter Thiel in directly to work as an FBI asset. Then went to work for Thiel's other company, Clearview AI, the facial recognition firm. Incidentally, the chief counsel for that firm, Tor Ekelund, was another activist lawyer who came and offered me money in jail when I was in 2013. He was brought by Jay Lederman, my former lawyer, and made some vague offers of money. And I get out and I find that he's represented Andrew Arnhauer, Weave, the guy who runs one of the biggest neo-Nazi networks. And Tor Ekelund is the lead counsel of that firm. So some of this stuff is very much in the open, insofar as that there's not a matter of connecting the dots. The dots are pretty clear, and they're kind of overlapping in many cases. There's nothing to connect. It's really more a matter of now that we know these things, who can we get to care? Who can we get to act responsibly? At least acknowledge these things, to stop calling people like me conspiracy theorists for just pointing out these things that that isn't even really seriously under dispute. And that's really what's made it. That's really what's allowed us to get to this point where it's so blatant, where we have so much overlap between this German fascist Peter Thiel, this scummy subhuman fascist who has been caught over and over again since 2011 in the most despicable, most comprehensive assaults on our democratic institutions, or what remains of them, to have continued to accumulate power across the world. I mean, Palantir runs the NHS data here in the UK. Anduril creates drones for tracking immigrants. Palantir, meanwhile, while his other company is doing drones to track immigrants, it's run by Palmer Luckey, this extreme, this nerd fascist, which is kind of the genre that we keep coming across. He's meanwhile overseeing the UN's refugee data. There's just so much wrong with this situation, and there's so little coherent defense of it, and there's non-existent. There's no existing sort of. There's no answer to the things that I've been bringing up. There is no argument here. These are people who admit to their fascism. They don't just dog whistle the fascism. They hire Nazis. And Peter Thiel hired Andrew Arnhauer, Weave, after he got a swastika tattoo on his chest, after he ran this Nazi group, this distributed denial of secrets group that was trying to get you fired 2 years ago for having me on, and which has interfered with my asylum thing. They work with the guy, Fuxnet, as he goes by, Fuxnet. You can find him on Twitter. It's been about 13 years now, spreading ridiculous, bizarre claims about me. Conspiracy theories, we would call them, I guess, if that term was useful. He oversaw Weave's the servers for his Nazi group until 2017. And now he works at DDoS, this allegedly left-wing queer space where everyone just happens to have FBI affiliations, and it's led by the Army and counterintelligence person whose name change in 2014 in the state of Pennsylvania. That document was leaked 2 years ago, probably by Russian intelligence. It just, nonetheless, it's an uphill battle. Not here, but when I'm dealing with my fellow white devils in every other facet, it's an ongoing uphill battle to get them to acknowledge that, look, I'm the guy who keeps going to prison, being pursued by the FBI. You can kind of trust me, or at least take a moment to review what I'm saying, give me the benefit of the doubt, look at my evidence, rather than siding with, in any dispute, rather than siding with these FBI assets who admit to being FBI assets, who work with Neil Rauhauser, the guy, he's in my book. He's one of the FBI assets who's been the most active against the left-wing activist world. One of the most disgusting people to have ever emerged in the 21st century, who brags about the suicides he's caused, who was threatening Kevin Gallagher before Kevin Gallagher disappeared and was found dead. This is a person that works with DDoS, and DDoS, as you can see from the New York Magazine profile of me from last year, it's still being given the benefit of the doubt to an extent that makes it harder for me to operate. It makes it harder for me when I go to an event or speak somewhere or writing an article. I don't know, what has this editor been told about me by this Army counterintelligence network? Why are they not responding? All of a sudden, is Stanley Cohen, the lawyer for all of these assets, is he, if he's contributing to their outlet, does that mean he's also saying the same things to them about me that he is publicly in these tweets? So those are the things that drove me again to try to commit suicide 2 years ago. That and just that inability to get these things to matter, including things that weigh on me because they're information discovered by people who are now dead. In some cases, people who would still be alive if they didn't know me. That's what made it very difficult for me to get clean, and made it very difficult for me to resume work, which I finally have. And the more one knows about it, the harder it is to forgive. It's harder to forgive those involved from top to bottom. Yeah.
You do mention it. Well, you mentioned it just now. You talk a little bit so far that I've read in the book about some of those personal losses, and I'm happy to come back to the, as you said, more important, broader politics. But the book is a memoir. It is very personal, and it is at times, I'll admit, it has been a little difficult to read, not because it's not, I think, very well written and fascinating, but because it's sad. There's elements of it that are sad. You express loss. You have lost, for what I think is on average, a good number of people so, even you dedicate the book to Michael Hastings. I know I've asked you about him every time you've come on. If you would want to say a word or two about why the book is dedicated to him, and just a quick reminder of who he was, and why his work remains so important.
Michael Hastings, I met him in 2009. We hit it off because we both shared similar concerns about the press, and we both shared I guess, a need, some kind of deep-seated psychological need to oppose these kinds of corruptions. I think, just like me, he really believed in these institutions as a young man, just like I did. And he was also deeply hurt to gradually learn how they actually operated, what kinds of people oversee it, you know, and he was writing about about the intelligence community. He was writing about Afghanistan, psychological warfare against U.S. sitting senators by the army. He was very successful. He wrote for Newsweek. He wrote for, back when Newsweek was still okay, magazine, BuzzFeed, all these major outlets. And last time I talked to him, I was in jail. It was 2013. That conversation, like every other conversation I had with other journalists and activists, was recorded and was mentioned by the FBI agent investigating me, Agent Robert Smith, in the gag order hearing when they were trying to gag me, which they did successfully for 2 years, where I couldn't talk about the case. He died shortly afterwards, Michael Hastings. He died in a car wreck where his car exploded. It was captured by an LAPD police cam. There was a number of articles afterwards about, what happened here, something mysterious. He was reporting his car being tampered with. He wrote to his editors saying the FBI is pursuing him. As a result of that, the FBI was asked by some reporters after his death, were you interested in Michael Hastings? And they said, no, it wasn't on our radar. And that was reported as fact in a number of places. A few months later, that was shown to be false. To be extremely false. It was already absurd on its face, given that the FBI and DOJ had already investigated every single person who donated to my legal defense fund. And this is Michael Hastings, someone, a known accomplice of mine, quite frankly. He was involved in the Tunisian Revolution. He played a very key but behind-the-scenes role in the early days of that. He was already of interest due to some other stories he worked on with an AWOL soldier. I mean, there was a number of reasons for the FBI and for a number of corrupt actors to be interested in Michael Hastings. What upset me, especially when I got out of prison, was able to see these things in sort of totality, was the extent to which he was discredited by some of his former colleagues in the weeks and months after his death. The idea that, he thought the FBI was after him was just paranoia, conspiracy theories. It's a term, two terms we find applied to us, those of us who work in the intelligence sphere. No matter how many times they're caught, the FBI, CIA caught surveilling us, disrupting our operations. It just, again, uphill battle trying to get the next reporter to remember that. Sometimes even when their own outlet has reported on it. The idea that the fact that he had amphetamines in his system was attributed. That was supposedly why he drove his car real fast, apparently, because you take speed and it makes you go fast, or whatever they're thinking. And it also was used to discredit, these documented interference that he was facing from the FBI and other actors. Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn's brother, has made some very pointed comments about Michael Hastings' death. Some jokes about the circumstances of that. These are the kinds of things that, in a more ideal world, would be, I wouldn't have to just come on here and say them. These would be things that would be of interest to the white press community. As it happens, though, the FBI is getting caught lying about their interest in Michael Hastings several times. Has not led to what we need to have every time a journalist dies in any circumstances. A look at what he was doing, what he was investigating, just because he can't finish what he's doing, he's dead. Even if there's no foul play, if someone is coming back with these major stories over and over again, getting generals fired in Afghanistan, revealing psyops campaigns, digging into Brenner, the CIA director, then it's just good. It's good policy to kind of cross some T's, dot some I's, just look into where he was going with it. And so I know that if I had successfully killed myself 2 years ago, I know exactly what the obituaries would read. They'd say he was troubled, mental illness. I mean, again, I had depression as a child. Like I have depression. Like that's somehow been expanded into this. Oh, also when I take drugs, I get high and act like I'm on drugs. That's kind of been expanded into this ongoing area whereby the things that we put out, that we reveal, tend to get kind of squeezed out of the picture and again discredited as needed. That quote by Emma Best, the Army counterintelligence officer in New York Magazine, saying that all of my conclusions are just based on PTSD and drug use and mental issues and all that. I mean, this is not something Emma Best believes. In her defense, she's lying, which is part of her job. It was her job when she was at Wikistrat. It was her job when she was in the Army and counterintelligence. It's her job now, and she signs NDAs in the course of those duties. So again, I'm less mad at those people who are doing their jobs than I am at the reporters who are not doing theirs. It's their job, Emma Best and Neil Rauhauser and Aubrey Cottle, the other white supremacist guy that works at the far left, this queer, activist space. It's their job to try to destroy us. And they're sometimes successful, which is understandable given the resources they have and given the environment in which we all conduct these operations, given the poor informational hygiene that the U.S. suffers under its press. So Michael Hastings, that's why it's dedicated to him. He is in many ways lucky that he died when he did and didn't have to see what's happened since. Mm-hmm. That's the way I think of it. I think the same thing of Aaron Schwartz, who I didn't know as well. Worked with him on a few things. I think those of us who are left alive, we carry this additional burden of trying to get each of these stories to take them to their logical conclusions, and perhaps produce some good from them. Perhaps get to some conclusion whereby the public is served, not just the interests of an editor or producer or me, whereby the public is served by this information. And so that's a difficult burden to carry. Now the book is out, you'll notice I'm in a much better mood. The fact that the New York Times ran this positive review that's almost entirely accurate and gets the point of the book is a huge victory. The way it happened was they had a New York Magazine book reviewer, so they did an outside review, wrote a great review, explained, in the course of the review, I'm not a hacker, I can't code. The FBI conducted this hack of Stratfor and then set me up for it. The headline that the New York Times added says, this hacker's story is blah, blah. They can't even read their own article to its logical conclusion. They can't even determine what they're reading. Again, if that's what happened, if this is really just organic failure of incompetence, which it may be with New York Times, it's hard to say. So that's useful. It means it's going to be much harder from here on out for this FBI influence network that sort of combines the talents of a lot of people from the CSIS in Canada, the FBI in the US, Army intelligence and contractors, ex-Scotland Yard officials. They'll kind of work together in this little milieu. It's going to make it harder for them going forward to either publicly or in private conversations continue to do the things that they've done that almost finished me off a few years ago, and which have made it basically impossible to get a real investigation into the death of Kevin Gallagher, for instance, or the events leading up to his disappearance and his death. It makes it harder for them to do that. Now, they still try. The Associated Press review by Frank, forget his last name, it came out. It was a pretty good review, by which I mean not just that it's positive, but that it was fairly accurate and fairly focused on the actual themes of the books. He is one of the reporters who the DDoS network, Distributed Denial of Secrets, the Army counterintelligence network, had tried to persuade to report somewhat differently on these things, just as they did when they tried to persuade Morgan University to fire you in those emails that they didn't realize that you were going to get your hands on, that I would. And I was able to persuade him this time. I just wrote him a long email back saying, hey, look, I know what these people are saying. Take a look at this, take a look at this, take a look at this. And it worked. There was no mention of this DDoS network and their grievances towards me. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen again, but it just means it's a proof of concept for me. It means that I can still talk to some of these people, these reporters, and be like, hey, you've been kind of steered wrong here. Please take a look at this. If you still want to go ahead with whatever you're going to write, go for it. But, so that's good. I mean, I'm surprised I'm surprised that there is, no matter how it happened, that there is a positive, accurate review in the New York Times explaining what this book is about, what it's not about. I'm not surprised that Reason magazine put a very inaccurate review with getting into the timeline all messed up, and that the guy over there who reviewed the book and kind of had some words for me, that he was much more impressed with the Oath Keepers years ago. This same reviewer, he was impressed because they paid they paid to get a billboard up supporting Snowden, and he found that to be really, Fred Hampton level shit right there. Me, he was less impressed with the fact that, that doesn't surprise me. This is a magazine that helps to cover for Andy Ngo, when Andy Ngo was still pretending to be a reporter who would just sort of accidentally falsely reported on Antifa. And of course, flash forward a few years, and that mask has sort of slipped. So anyway, so there's, as you can tell from all this meandering, there are a lot of interconnected issues here involving the press and FBI. The fact that Andy Ngo was listed as the informant by the Metropolitan Police in my arrest a few years ago here in the UK, but is still called a journalist by both the Metropolitan Police and by other alt-right people, while he still secretly works for Peter Thiel via several of Peter Thiel's media outlets. That's an issue. That's something that deserves some examination. We need to look back and say, how did we get here? Why is Andy Ngo, this guy who participated in the cider riot attack and was there with these far right white supremacists when they went and paralyzed a woman, they went and attacked a left wing bar? Why was he meanwhile being given space to write about Antifa? Why was the New York Times, all these outlets, so aggrieved when someone threw a milkshake at him? Meanwhile, you can contrast that pretty easily with the things that happen to left-wing activists, and the attention that gets. We can all contrast it with 2017 and the articles about not punching Nazis. You shouldn't be punching Nazis. That probably wasn't really the solution back in 2017. It may have been, the solution could have been the opposite. So what we're seeing is, again, we're seeing the same thing we see with fascism from the beginning of fascism. They do very well within institutions. They do very well, police and the military. They recruit from these things. They're covered for by these things for the most part, not entirely. In the U.S. in particular, again, we can all see the Black Lives Matter protest in front of the Capitol. Then we can see the police presence there, the militarized police presence, and then we can see January 6th when the white supremacists and Trump people descended on the Capitol. We can see that there were so few police that they were able to crush a few to death in the course of breaking in. White supremacy is not a concept that I really believed in or was familiar with before I went to prison. It was something I knew of as a man. I knew there's white supremacists, but I didn't think of the society as inherently a white supremacist structure. I just didn't follow that. It took, I think, the last 5 or 6 years. Well, I think this is about 2017, 2016. Now I see it everywhere. And I don't think it's because I'm woke or because, I think it's because it's everywhere. And I think it's a white supremacist structure that we have to acknowledge and understand, and we have to address it in a way that will get other white kids who might be right now, they're following the alt-right people, and they feel aggrieved, they feel attacked, they feel like, they're people being mad at them for being a white person, blah blah. We have to do a better job of reaching them, which is not hard, because the way this conversation has occurred in the public space, being carried on by grifters on Twitter and so forth, it was destined to lead to a sort of splashback and give and provide aid and comfort and a great deal of space and credibility to the alt-right, which is the exact last thing this country needed.
Oh man, so much there. Well, I'll just. It took me, as I'm reading the beginning of the book, and you start off by talking about at least some of your prison experience, and you make mention of, and I don't know to what extent you come back to it in the book, but you do make mention in the beginning something to the effect of racism being, or the not racism, but the function of race in the society being more than you had realized. And I remember, and I can only really equate it because I've only done a little bit of time in holding cells, so it's not a fair comparison. But the only way I can equate it in terms of my own experience is the military, where I saw really for the first time the retreat to racial groupings, to nationalisms within racial groups, in a way that I hadn't experienced it in the quote unquote real world. And that seems to be what you were talking about in your experience, that everybody had to basically pick a side. You talk about this fascinating white Muslim dude who at the end of the day, when Islam wasn't enough, he would retreat to his white nationalisms with the sort of hip hop inspired. I mean, he seems like a very wild character.
Well, just kidding. Just in fairness to him, I should note, because this has been confused a couple of times. He wasn't. He whenever there's a grouping where there's an Islamic grouping, he joins that.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just
no, but that was what. Yeah, no, I got that.
He wasn't white nationalist at all. Like he was. I mean,
no. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. What I was trying to say is, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to misrepresent. I understood it in reading your book. It's clear to me that that's what you were saying. But what I meant to say is that what I meant to say was that when there was no Muslim community readily available, right, you point out that he would sort of fall back, not into white nationalist thinking per se, but into the grouping, because he basically had to pick a group, you point. I mean, so he's like, if there's no Muslims, then I got to go white, is basically what, which I thought was, so all of that, I did find fascinating in what you were describing. And it is, we talk about it in different contexts around here a lot, that particularly when it comes to political prisoners, which you clearly have been, that once you are going to prison seems to force that kind of reckoning. It is clarifying to a certain extent, it seems, into what this society is really ultimately all about, and what it's capable of, and what it's intending to do, and what its goals are. So I thought that part was fascinating. So I'm again happy to hear you make reference to it now, and it having played, at least to a certain extent, a positive role in helping you come to terms with what is actually happening out here. But that's no, I know you get it's important.
This
I don't mind. No, it's cool. But I will say, so this other note I made here in terms of your introduction, you can make any other points about that if you want to. I just wanted to co-sign and acknowledge that you talk a little bit about that, and the way you describe your prison experience, it is fascinating, terrifying, and whatnot. But it's a fascinating read. But you make one of those that I made here is that I said the way you invoke Lenin may not be a Leninist favorite as an intro to a section of the book on hubris. So you reference, and I forgot exactly. I didn't copy and paste the exact note, but it was something. You make a reference to Lenin, and about something about
he had
him.
He had written a letter to one of his associates, and he was basically like, day after day, more idiocy, more nonsense to contend with. He was complaining about his situation, trying to establish this party in the face of what he considered idiocy. And the book, The Bolsheviks, but this is where this comes from. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but the author adds, it did not seem to occur to Lenin that he enjoyed this process.
Right.
And that was really sort of evoked. That was really, I was comparing myself to Lenin in that sense. But again, this is the life we chose.
And you talk about it. I noted here also that you said you had some sort of psychological need to rebel, and you struggled with. You said something about you set up your future self to suffer some consequence that your present self can't allow to let go. And I took that as something you were comparing yourself to in terms of that reference to Lenin, that you willfully throw yourself into these situations, even knowing, or maybe not consciously, that there's going to be some sort of consequence that you're going to have to deal with later. so I didn't really have anything else other to say. I just, you know, as someone who appreciates Lenin, I just was like, you know, I just thought it was funny. Like that's how you.
Yeah. I mean, certain revolutionaries
just,
have, you know, they have deep-seated psychological needs that brought them to be revolutionaries in many cases. You know, there's some people like Alexander Berkman who I would not compare myself to simply because he was so fully formed at the age of 17, 18. He definitely had psychological things driving him, but I think he was mostly aware. The thing with me is that there are some certain kinds of phenomena that I react to with that I can't get over, that I can't not be murderously enraged about, and that's kind of that's the other facet aside from being a jokester and an entertainer, which I also am. That's the other sort of thing that kind of has gotten me in the situation I am today. The need to entertain, the need to avenge.
And then, oh man, so would you say a little bit more about your or what you want us to take away from reading about your prison experience in this book?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how much, if any were needed, of how much, how prone we are to just going along with whatever system. There's a description in there where I note in some places, some federal prisons, everything's race, and you can't smoke it, you can't share a cigarette with the black dude, blah blah. There's others where it's all by state, and suddenly it's all me and all the other blacks from Dallas and the Mexicans from Dallas, and we're all up against the Oklahomans. You know, it depends on the structure, and people happily, for the most part. I mean, obviously, there's some people who are actually racial, I guess I would say true racial. What's the separatists who don't jive with that. But for the most part, the same kid who he goes in when he's 19, 2 years later, he's got Aryan Brotherhood tattoo and blah blah. Can just as easily get pushed into this deal where he's now a Texas nationalist fighting the Californians. It's just we're all very malleable and very heavily influenced by our environment. I guess I would say that. I mean, there's so much that's of interest there, and that's the great thing about prison is that it's an unusual situation. As someone said in the comments, it's an amalgam of society, or it's a microcosm of society. In many ways, it absolutely is, and it's something you can study quite easily, and you can learn a great deal from. A lot of what I understand on a sort of intrinsic level now about institutions and institutional operations and sort of group dynamics comes from spending 4 years in those hyper compressed situations. It's a situation where you have an unusual degree of access to the information about the world society around you. To those of us who investigate conspiracies as our profession, and there was a time when all journalists were supposed to do that. That was the point of being a journalist. You investigate conspiracies. You don't investigate like things that everyone's openly talking about. But that's a great training ground for that because, like, for instance, I was when I was in the medium security towards the end, I got kicked out of the low. I got sent to the medium security in South Texas, which I liked better anyway. And among the prison gangs, there still is some taboos about taking drugs, especially hard drugs. Like technically, it's against the rules in many prison gangs. You're not supposed to be not supposed to be addicted to something, which is a reasonable rule. If you're involved in racial or gang warfare on a day-to-day basis, you have to be prepared. Blah, blah. In reality, especially the place I was at, where the conflicts were between mostly the Paisas and the Tongos. Tongos are the U.S. Hispanics. Paisas are generally generic Mexican, Latin American pseudo gang. That rule, like a lot of places, was violated. And the only person who probably knew the extent of everyone's drug use in our unit better than anyone else was me, simply because I wasn't part of a gang at any of those times. Throughout that period at the medium security, and I've got along well with the leaders of all the groupings and so forth, and so they would tell me things that they wouldn't tell their fellow gang members. So I know who was addicted to Suboxone, which is important to know when you're addicted to Suboxone, like I was. You want to know who to get it from, blah blah. So you get a sense, you get an inside view, you get like a fifth dimensional view, kind of these dynamics that you would not get being within the group, being a member. If I were a Aryan Brotherhood guy and I'm got another Aryan Brotherhood guy, he's not going to tell me that he's got some coke. Luckily I'm not an Aryan Brother guy, so I can find out who's got the coke. Do some coke. That's one of the nice things about not being. That's a great Should be a slogan. If for keeping kids going into racism, like if you want to go to prison, remember you might want to do some deals with the Mexicans to get some meth, and you can't do that if you're a racist.
Got to keep those channels open. Yeah,
it's going to come from the white boys anyway, for the most part, but sometimes, not always.
Yeah, no. I like the part, in fact, where you said, I don't know if I'm reading it correctly, but I thought an interesting way that you dealt with explaining the evolution of your understanding of race was that you have a section here where you said, I don't know, something you were being processed in or something, and the guard says to you, what got you so mad, white boy?
Yep.
An intake guard, and then you reveal at the end of the paragraph that he was white, that he himself was white. Yeah. It's like, and it confused you, like, why is he calling me white boy? He's white.
I didn't know yet, but the white boy is a pretty common. It's a common phrase among. If you saw, it's a great movie. If you saw Shot Caller, came out a number of years. It's on Netflix. You can watch it. It's about a guy who goes to prison. I forgot the actor's name, and he takes over. Well, spoiler. Anyway, he goes to prison, and he gets involved with the white gangs there and all that. And they call each other. I mean, white boy is a term of honor among some of them. Woods, blah blah. I'll show you how a white boy fights. So it's actually not always a derisive term. But it's.
And did you say, and Woods? You said, didn't you say that you didn't know why they called them Woods? It's Pecker Woods, right?
Yeah, but I don't know. But I don't know. I don't think anyone knows the exact etymology which came first. Peckerwood probably is that like an old Southern.
That's an old anti-white slur. Probably
So it's probably adapted by the white community.
Yeah. That's what I thought it was. That's what immediately I thought of that. I was like, I was just reading. I said, oh, Barrett is a novice when it comes to the racial slurs of this country. I was like, you're still learning. I was like, that's one thing he still has. I said, I do
learning
that.
Is a lifelong process. I think we just need to bring back OFE. The kids today don't know what an
all
OFE
of that. Yeah, absolutely. And again, my favorite, I still to this day, my favorite in the Navy was when the black men would call white boys Keeblers. Keeblers. Because instead of saying cracker, they made reference to the Keebler commercial.
Keebler, right? Okay.
Keeblers, and I thought that was always my favorite because nobody understood it. It was like, man, these Keeblers, and then they wouldn't understand.
That out pretty quickly, I think. I just forgotten about. We don't have the Keebler elves over here in the UK, so I forgot.
Yeah, exactly. Getting
my white roots. Or my
white roots. I did also, as I said, I went and read the concluding chapter, and I did like, again, sort of spoiler alert, I like the way you end, and that you say, I love the moral. You say, and so ends my story. The moral is that if you take lots of hard drugs and fuck with the government, everything will work out fine in the end. And I know that's that's what the kids need to know. And but at the same time, I took that obviously. Well, to me, it's tongue in cheek. It's because a lot of what, correct me on this, because a lot of what you're talking about, it's titled "My Glorious Defeats." You are talking about losses. You are talking about. You even mentioned at the beginning of our discussion today again the horrific state of a lot of these struggles that you and your colleagues have been waging. But I did read that. I did add in my mind the little racial component that if you are white and male and do a lot of drugs and fuck with the government, it ends well. I don't know if that translates across all racial and gendered lines, or class lines even. Although your own background is fascinating in that way too. Like when can somehow, if folks aren't clear, you might come across as having a class background and a background and historical experience that you did not actually have. But it's so sardonic. There's flawed perfect. There you go. Flawed perfect got the perfect. But correct me on any of that if you would want, in terms of what you want the kids to know when they read this story. And because you aren't, I'll stop here, but I don't read it as, I haven't finished. I don't read it and get from you, this is a whole horror nightmare, give up, give in, we can't win. I didn't take that. I took that you have to be more clear about how difficult this fight actually is. so that we can wage a better struggle. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So my grandma, back when I was living with my mom, my grandma, back when I was like 7 or 8, we shared an apartment. She got a job as a secret shopper, which is a thing where you go undercover to a store and they, the owners pay for this, and you go and just shop there and just make sure, and you report back, was I treated well, blah, blah. If you're a secret shopper, if that's your job or your hobby, to some extent, you're looking for problems. You're looking for your job is to go through this process and expose it. That always made an impression on me. To the extent that my friends, my associates have died, to the extent that our families have been traumatized, to the extent that, all of these things have occurred in the process. They're tragedies, but they're also it's a narrative that properly used can help to provide some insight into things that can be easily forgotten or missed out on. It's like in the prison system where when you're trying to take your captors to court because you've been your due process rights have been violated. You have to do something called exhausting the process. You have to fill out these forms, send in more forms, blah, blah. You have to exhaust your options. What I'm trying to do publicly is to exhaust the options available under the liberal consensus, to show that they're not really options, to show that, here's this process where I'm not breaking any laws. I'm helping to reveal extreme crimes by very powerful people working with the DOJ and FBI and CIA and the Nazis, working with actual Nazis. The Congress is getting involved, investigating Eric Johnson, fellow from Georgia. I forgot he was the Democratic minority leader at the time in the Judiciary Committee from Georgia, a black guy. I'm forgetting his name now. Tried to pursue this investigation into these things in a Team Themis, Peter Thiel. That investigation was shot down. And so you're doing these things, and the media is supposed to be functioning, the Congress is supposed to be functioning, the law enforcement is supposed to be enforcing laws and not sort of acting as a concierge service for corporations to violate the law in the most despicable possible ways. But those things are all happening, and they're being revealed. And then the feds, people who are involved in this same conspiracy, come after us. They come after our supporters. They come after our mother. No, not Eric Holder. That was the head of the
I was trying to
I'll think of his name in a second. But so what I'm doing is exhausting my options, both in the U.S. and the UK. I'm starting out by engaging in the processes as we are told they function. These processes that get their credibility, their moral authority from the fact that they supposedly work and that they're just. And I'm showing that they're not, and that each one is not. And that so to the extent that I fail, to the extent that I'm defeated in getting the press to acknowledge this thing, to go after Peter Thiel, to the extent I'm defeated in just living my life without having bomb threats, and the Dallas FBI covering up these bomb threats because I helped to expose media complicity with the police union in the death of Botham Jean. All of that work goes towards this teleological end, whereby in the next few years, it will be easier and easier for those who read my book or follow the story to really understand these processes are all broken by design. And the only solution facing us, if we want to have a decent civilization or even a shot at a decent civilization, is to redirect the violence that has been carried out during my lifetime, that the violence that has claimed millions of innocent Arab lives, just from the U.S. and UK's conduct alone, without much discussion, without even a debate. Redirect that violence, minimize it, and redirect it back to the ones who are engaging in it. To do that, to get to that point, we need to have a consistent, honest, documented narrative. That's not something we can really achieve with the press for the most part at this point. because the press can be bought off, they can be dissuaded, they can be conned, and then when they're conned, they don't want to admit it. It makes them look bad. Those are the mundane. That's kind of the face of the mundane evil that we're up against. So all we can kind of do is occasionally peek out, or sort of sneak past it, present this firm case to whoever is privy to it, to whoever will see it, and give them the information they need to have to determine how they're going to go forward as things deteriorate further. I think the best way to move forward is to continue to appraise oneself of what's known about the enemy, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Pierre Omidyar, CIA, NQTEL, and the various subgroupings and lesser individuals, to join groups like the John Brown Gun Club in Dallas, or whatever left-wing armed civic groups you can find in your area, and to be prepared for what may come. Because if the last 15 years tell us anything, it's that very few people really have a sense of the future, which is understandable. So it's good to be prepared, as they taught us in the Boy Scouts. And we have a sense of what to prepare for. We've seen what things have happened. The Black community in the U.S. in particular has no excuse, has less excuse than anyone, not to understand the situation. They've taken the brunt of it for generations upon generations. And the myth of the 90s that, things were all going to get better and we were going to cure racism with, public school programs and stuff like that, the stuff that a lot of us believed in, including me back in the 90s, the incrementalism and the end of history. Now that's been proven wrong, just hilariously, desperately wrong. People need to get out of that mode of thinking. But it's not the 90s anymore. Accept where we are, accept where we're clearly going, and prepare. Prepare for whatever's to come. And they've given us clues and hints.
My slight disagreement would be that, and this is just again because of my own myopic focus, is what you say sounds like it should be make logical sense, but it doesn't take into account the impact of what you end up writing about on the Black community in terms of the levels of psychological warfare targeting the Black community to suppress that logical conclusion. It has been tremendous, and the promotion of false pundits, leaders, narratives onto successive generations. I see it in my classrooms every semester. The students coming in there have been so highly targeted, and then what's happening now worse is the representation of Black histories through Obama narratives and Netflix narratives and Disney narratives. That something you said the last time you were with us on this platform has never left. You said something to the effect that we're getting to the point where people will be convinced that there is no need to struggle. And that is where I feel like many in Black communities in this country and throughout the diaspora have been led. So, but that notwithstanding, I get and appreciate what you're saying there. A couple other things that I didn't want to, if you got a couple minutes, and there were a few comments I wanted to pull in a question or two, but I did want to ask, because since the last time you got here, Julian Assange has been, I don't know if release is the right word, but actually I don't, yeah. Any thoughts on that? Just
yeah, I mean, he was the most dangerous man in the world, and they've neutralized him. He made some significant mistakes. He has his character was of such that he would have done a fine job of doing this initial mission, setting up WikiLeaks, allowing, leaks, disseminating them, were it not for his own fundamental flaws, as well as the apparatus, the military intelligence apparatus that was directed at him. Someone who does some of the things he does is not an inherently honest person, which one needs to be both pragmatically and morally to lead a revolution. rather than go through again the specifics, some of them are about my book. Some of them, some of them are pretty well known and have been gone over by those of us who were there, who were involved in these things to different extents. His own second in commands, people who have worked with him and under him. I would say you can't treat people like pawns and expect to lead, especially if you're caught over and over again doing that. At any rate, the bottom line is that, again, he was persecuted not for his faults, but for his noble deeds. He has lots of faults. That when you have faults, which we all do, those are the things that are generally used as a means of discrediting you, of dehumanizing you. And so those of us, like myself, who I ran around in a drug haze for years, not taking this seriously, making it easier for the FBI assets to discredit the important things I was trying to spread. That's my fault. I failed there. In a number of other ways, I failed the community, and I failed my own people and myself and this thing. My virtue is that I can learn from these things and accept them. It's the exact opposite with a number of these other people, particularly those who are susceptible to white supremacist ideology, and who, as Assange was, and as some of his associates have been. At any rate, he's quiet now. He's done. This was inevitable. He started out with the backing and the support of a number of people who are tremendous people. He took a path that basically all but ensured that of those who were still alive, and some of the best ones weren't just a few years later, Aaron Schwartz, so forth. Those people were going to gradually lose their faith in him. And they would be replaced, his fan base, his constituency, with some of the worst, most ridiculous, scummy people that exist, from Trump on down. That was the inevitable result of the choices he made. That is, again, there is a lot that needs to still be explored, and it needs to get out in a meaningful way regarding the ways in which he was set up and the ways in which certain media people, mostly at Gawker, some of them moved on to New York Times, The Intercept, and so forth, FBI assets, in which they were caught doing the same, committing statute violations to a much less ambiguous extent than some of the ones he was charged with, and that Chelsea Manning was alluded to having engaged in, by which I mean they were helping to try to crack a file or something. Adrian Shin, this guy who was a Gawker, then went on to the New York Times, writing about Cambridge Analytica and helping to expose these things. The same guy who was attacking me and everyone else who went after Peter Thiel back in 2011 and writing and putting out outlandish, contradictory falsehoods about us. He's in my criminal discovery files. He's contacting me, other people, Sabu, the FBI asset, encouraging people to commit crimes that don't make any sense. He's the one, Adrian Chin, the person I mentioned, he is the one person that I've actually managed to force out of this industry. He went dark a number of years ago, and he won't be coming back. His associates are still out there. Sam Biddle, John Cook, hello, Joseph Mims, my parents. Joseph Min at the Washington Post. Most of them have done very well for themselves. They've continued to elevate their station. They've continued to work with Peter Thiel, sometimes the FBI, sometimes various cutouts between the CIA and so forth. Neil Rauhauser, the FBI asset I mentioned, the most disgusting one. He was mentioned in the Washington Post a few weeks ago in a Joseph Min article as a disinformation researcher. This is a person who was threatening to swat his fellow FBI assets in messages to his handler, FBI Special Agent Daniel Borsig, in 2011, among other things. And Joseph Min's in the book. He's in it. He's not in the book as much as he was going to be. He did manage to. He reached out to a number of people, including Kevin Gallagher, who's now dead. Managed to get Kevin Gallagher to give him an early copy of the book so he could see what I had on him, which is a lot. and and seems to have been in touch with the law. Great, hold on now, come on. It seems to have been in touch with the lawyers at Macmillan. There was definitely something mysterious went on there. You and I discussed this back in the day. There was a long periods where no one, including reporters who have inquired, knew what was going on, why they weren't getting back to me. Why was there a 1.5 year long period where no progress was made in the book, and the lawyers told us that there's some legal issue we can't hear about. Does it connect? Does it have anything to do with the fact that all my FBI files are still classified, but not subject to public review due to ongoing investigations? I don't know, but there's a number of these individuals. What I live for is the time, hopefully starting in September, when I give this presentation at the Frontline Club, this journalism club in London, in which I'll lay out the rest of the details about these individuals. I certainly hope that when I do lay out this rest of this information about these individuals and the documentation of what they've been doing with the FBI, who they've targeted, what the consequences have been for the public, not just for us and the ones who have been bullied into suicide, but the public. The public has been the victim of these people.
Will the rest of us be able to see and hear that presentation at some point?
Yes,
okay,
it will be made public shortly after it is produced, and documentation as well.
So, I mean, I see some of the comments in the chat. I mean, I have a similar question. What do you encourage for people who, let's say, for young people who might read your work, this book in particular, and think about their own future careers in struggling against state power, white supremacy, journalistic freedom? I mean, as someone you've been fairly upfront, not only with your incarceration, but the drug addiction and abuse, the self-harm, the loss of loved ones and comrades. I mean, what would you, again, aside from the conclusion that everything will end up all right, what would you encourage for people? Like, when they, to the extent that they hear the names of Michael Hastings and Aaron Schwartz and others, and then learn some of their work and stories, the harrowing nature of being, again, of confronting state power and intelligence communities and whatnot. How do you engage? What do you say anything? What would you want to tell folks like that?
The Persian nobility, classical Persian nobility, educated their children to do three things: to ride a horse, to shoot a bow, and to speak the truth. That remains operative today, especially now. The number one, the greatest, the most important mechanism one can have on hand to deal with all of these things, to assess them, is an honest, open sense of inquiry. Because the most effective, as you've mentioned, with the Black community and with people around the world, psychological warfare is the first and oftentimes the only weapon used in most conflicts. That it's the weapon that prevents conflicts from occurring, prevents people from rising up. And that is a difficult thing to contend with. Unfortunately, in the last 10 years, disinformation researchers, such as our FBI asset, Ofe Friends, we mentioned earlier, have popped up. There's also careerists at the Atlantic and so forth that specialize in conspiracy theories and disinformation. And most of them, you can look back to the 6-7 years and see them getting something wrong. Like, the Atlantic claiming that the American Civil War was a conspiracy theory, like in 2015, like that the idea that the U.S. might come into civil war is a conspiracy theory, which is weird because it's not even a conspiracy. It's just a thing that might happen. And funny because 2 years later, the Atlantic was running a big special issue on how we're already in a civil war. So, I guess that wasn't a conspiracy theory, or I guess conspiracy theories are okay or whatever. There's no coherency to some of these people. The ability, so you have to determine coherency and the ability to predict if you want to assess someone's capabilities. So the shorthand for that, I would just say you can probably write off pretty much every major outlet and a lot of the minor ones in terms of being a source of information. any outlet, any reporter, any activist, any public figure who is willing and able to explain their conduct and associations and anxious to do so, that's a person worth giving your attention to. Anyone who refuses to do any of those things, who won't explain themselves and won't acknowledge fault, that is either a sociopath or just a person who's not qualified to be occupying a space of this importance, occupying a space in our informational ecosystem. So the first important thing is make sure don't do what I do, kids. Don't get taken in over and over again by your heroes, and then gradually have to learn that there's something else, or that they've been bought off or blackmailed, and then have to then go to prison for them, and then get out and learn what they've done, and then have to deal with their remaining supporters when you try to point these things out. Be very cautious as to who you give your loyalties to, and the loyalty should always be to the principle, not the person. So that's what you're doing, and beyond that, like I said, that leaves the horse and the bow. You will never go wrong going into a Civil War kind of situation knowing how to shoot. You will never go wrong familiarizing yourself with military survival guides and so forth. You don't want to talk about it loudly because I'm imagine, regardless of all this happened, I'm sure there's still a sense that survivalists and all that are just crazy people who believe in conspiracy theories like civil wars and so forth. So yeah, and just prepare yourself. I mean, just look at, there's so much disaster preparedness literature and material that one can review that applies in this situation. Yeah, I mean, it's not that complicated. Now, there are specific, I'm going to be presenting at some point also, in addition to this talk I'll be giving in September, a sort of video on what to look for in terms of if you think that you might be being infiltrated by FBI assets. This is really for specific activist groups, whether it be Black activist groups in the U.S. that are now Black identity extremists, and they get a lot of attention from the FBI, as you know, or associations like mine that historically expose, they do counterintelligence on the state. Those are the groups that have the most to worry about from police infiltration. Here in the UK, there's a different apparatus, there's a different set of procedures than there is in the US, and of course, when you have a lot of online activity, that is hello. So that's a good start. It just beware of your fellow man. Arm yourself accordingly, and be willing to accept reality as it unfolds. Don't get caught on a nail and find ways to ignore certain facts about certain people because those people are espousing what you believe, and also because they're also being opposed by the state. It's very easy to fall into the idea of, this person, Julian Assange, the state going after and all that, that must mean he's telling the truth. Well, sometimes. I mean, unfortunately, there's a larger picture there with other whistleblowers, some of whom, like Val Broeksmith, are dead, who have caught Assange a number of times, violating our common principles. And of course, Val Broeksmith himself, as you may remember, he ended up working with the FBI, not just against Deutsche Bank, but against me and my network. And that was recorded in there's an audio conversation at the LA FBI headquarters back in late 2020 that has been public for a while now.
So yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, but sorry, I keep going from broad principles into these specific, individual affairs, but you do have to gradually familiarize yourself with the things that we can document in terms of how this stuff works, how the FBI operates, how activists fail. Then you can develop a sense of how to protect yourself to the extent that you end up doing a good job of it, doing a good job of opposing the state, in which case you start being pursued and by contractors and police and so forth. And that's when it becomes important. Just like education should start right before the kids hit puberty. Likewise, education about police infiltration and so forth should begin before you're about to take a step, that might bring you to their attention.
Appreciate that. And yeah, my godfather says that all the time too. You got to do things for the principle, not the people. And I remember the first time he told me that, I struggled with that. But he said, because he said, people are people and they're going to disappoint you and be shady and trifling. It's the principle. You got to stay focused on the principle. So right on. I do have a couple more questions, and I'm going to grab a couple from that I've been grabbing from the comments, if that's cool. First of all, Flawed Perfect said that your book is hilarious and inspiring. So far, I would have to agree with that. Chris H is saying, I have to wake up to the COVID deception. All right. I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but all right. There's a couple I probably need to and this one, yes, shout out to Leah. And I hope, Leah, you and yours are doing well. I wonder if Barrett has read or heard of Dr. Orasami Burton's book, Tip of the Spear.
It's called what?
This would be Tip of the Spear. I thought the exact same thing. And I thought I got a copy. Hold on. I got a copy right here. I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Because I think the book this book is sorry if I can get it. This book is I think it's legendary. And I think you would do and it's more than that. For instance, I've said it's the best book I've ever read on the history of U.S. communication studies, just as because I just think all the things that it does so much. It's more than just about Attica per se. And I think what I've read so far in your memoir and where I think you are framework wise it would be a good fit for you to get into that book.
No, it sounds like a theme. The themes are pretty fundamental and the setting
very much overlapping. Yeah, absolutely. And then even in terms of I'm just going to leave it there. Absolutely. And then when you do, I'll set up an interview. We'll have you and Ori come back and have a round table on prisons and psychological warfare, intelligence and communication. It'll be fascinating. And by then I'll have finished your book. I had a similar thought. Flawed Perfect. We're on a wavelength today. I don't know if we know each other, but shout out to you. Salute to Flawed Perfect. Barrett, can you give us an update on Dank?
So Dank, not to be confused with D. D was the white Muslim.
Right.
Dank,
that's
the
right.
Black guy from I forgot where, somewhere in Dallas. He was in on a couple of charges. One of which.
And Dank wasn't a reference to weed. Like that was another thing.
I know it might be. I wasn't clear on that. I'm assuming so.
Yeah, that's what go ahead.
That was right before Dank became this online word. Well,
I've known since my childhood. I've always understood Dank to be like a reference to a
but then it became a kind of humor, a kind of online humor that's in the scripture by the time I got out. But anyway, so I don't know what happened. Last time I saw him, it would have been in Seagoville jail unit, 2013. Last time I saw him, I was in the shoe. I think he was in the shoe. Which is where he belonged.
Oh wow!
I think he hit somebody. Yeah, he hit somebody with the padlocks over. Because
you describe an act of violence that he.
Magazines. He was. Even just aside, he was in some kind of conflict with this guard, some particular guard who'd never walked that fucking floor before, and suddenly he's like engaging in this one-sided conflict with this poor guard who doesn't know what's going on. And it's like, you're not in a fight with this guy, Dank. What are you doing? Anyway, I don't know. I'm assuming he's back out on the streets. I don't think he wasn't facing a whole lot of charges. My understanding. It's hard to say. I don't know what happened to him.
Anyway, that was shout out to Dank. I hope all is well, and I hope he's not hitting people because the fight was. If I remember correctly, the fight was over. Pastry?
The pies, because there was the pie. The pie trade was very lucrative. People were making these great pies. There was some secret methodology of it. Involved the microwave. It involved Jolly Ranchers. Anyway, my understanding was that it was a dispute over who was going to sell pies from this particular table. Now I don't understand why another table just next to it wouldn't have been prime real estate too. maybe there's more to it. Anyway, but
It's
yeah,
always more to it, man. It's always
yeah,
more
because I was
to
walking
it.
around, I was walking
Yeah,
the
yeah,
tier, and they were having the fight in the cell. I was trying not to look in. I was wanting to follow it and all that. Yeah, and then they got to fight, and then the other guy, LA, goes and sits down, and then Dank goes with he goes to a sock and some padlocks, and goes and hits him beside the head.
Woo.
I don't know if they ever if they made amends over that, if they became friends again.
That's a lot to come back from. Getting
Not
hit
really.
getting hit with a sock full of locks.
The first Woods meeting I had to go to, one guy was sitting right there, and the other guy, he'd hit him with he hadn't hit him with locks. A rumor going around that he had, but he hadn't. Anyway, but I mean, these things get squashed, and that's how it kind of works. So,
Gamandi is asking, do you like Jeremy Scahill? Do you have thoughts on Scahill?
Scahill is fully aware. At least at the very least, at the latest, in 2018, when I made him aware of certain things, and he had me on a show, a few months before. This is after I left The Intercept already. He's aware of some of the things that should give pause to anyone working for The Intercept, reading The Intercept, giving money to The Intercept, or submitting their classified leaks to The Intercept. He was aware of the degree of FBI overlap and intelligence community overlap at the very latest by 2018. And it's impossible that he's not. I mean, 4 or 5 people have left The Intercept, high profile departures from The Intercept just in the last couple of years, including sort of square, basic bitch journalists like what's his name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, so there's no question that The Intercept has been employing FBI assets. There's no question that the Reality Winner article that was written originally by 5 people at The Intercept all have bylines on the article from the documents Reality Winner had sent that they provided the NSA. There's no question that one of them, Sam Biddle, had celebrated my sentencing in an article for Gizmodo a few years prior to that. No question that he collaborated with FBI assets right at the time we were all getting raided to write this article that every journalist in New York saw for Gawker, claiming that a bunch of things that the FBI assets had done to each other, including this Neil Rauhauser guy, was actually anonymous activists doing it to them. Again, 100% knew that. And there's no question that Richard Esposito, who also had a byline on that article, and yes, Ryan Grimm's the other one, Richard Esposito became spokesperson for the NYPD. And he became spokesperson for the NYPD at the very time that the NYPD was crashing their cruisers into journalists and crowds of BLM supporters. We didn't become a journalist spokesperson for NYPD like in the 90s or something like that, maybe during a lull period where they're not being especially openly fascist. He did it at the time when the FBI should have been shut down by the UN, at the least. That's the guy, bylined article, handling materials from whistleblowers. Scahill, Biddle, John Cook, a lot of these guys, Grimwald, when society breaks down, I hope they face justice.
So my last question for you is just sort of where you were kind of leaving off with your memoir. What you sort of and sort of what you said at the beginning of the interview here, in fact, that you're back to work. What does that mean? What is forthcoming? You talked about this presentation you're giving.
I'll tell you,
what else?
I'm writing for the Paris Review now, of all things.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and so again, I hadn't been writing for the last few years. The book, I just didn't see the point. I was about to give up. Now this thing has gone relatively well, and there seems like a chance of some. Seems like a way forward. So now I'm back to it. I went ahead and got sober, unfortunately, a few weeks ago. That'll solve a couple of problems. It's time, I had to get a run. So I'm running for Paris. I'm going to be doing stuff for them, and then from there on out, I'm going to find out which editors. I feel like I've done enough media exposure, so I'm just going to try to work with like decent editors for outlets that aren't fronts for something or that aren't just cripplingly amoral, and maybe write actual articles about actual things. again, I'm still going to be focusing on these same issues. The disinformation industry, the obsession with the term conspiracy theory, blah, blah. But I'll also be writing some fun stuff, for the Parish Review mostly. By fun stuff, I mean, writings on George Orwell and so forth. So it won't all be apocalyptic anarchist agitprop. Some of it will be funny. So.
Hey, right on. Fair enough. Looking forward to it. And obviously you're welcome back here anytime. I will tap into the Paris Review and add that to the media rotation. Anything else that you want to get to that I didn't invite you to? Any issue topics from the book or points that you want to return to, or any quickly questions from the audience that I missed before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, every few months I remember the existence of Jacob, the big-headed scientist from Malcolm X's autobiography and the Nation of Islam.
Yacoub? Oh, the
Jacob, Jacob, the guy who created white people. It's number one is because they call it the big-headed. It's such a weird like descriptor. Like he's a big head. He's a big head guy. It's like that you called him. You called him big. No wonder he created white people. And I went on Wikipedia just now and they looked it up and just looked up his page, and the picture they have in the drawing from something like some guy did in the 90s in some pamphlet is just out of sight. Apparently he has two brains. Jacob, yeah. 2 brains. So he's got a really weird, he looks unusual. But anyway, he, shout out to Jacob. Without him, we wouldn't be here today, me and the other white devils. So, that's the only thing that's on my mind. Yeah, he looks like a Klingon, exactly. Somebody said he looks like a Klingon. He looked, yeah. This is all you guys.
Listen,
you guys start. Jacob wasn't white. He was
no, he was a mad black scientist.
Let's keep that in mind.
Yeah, and my big brother Jamil's in the audience. He could break it down for us the next time. In fact, Jamil, I thought you and Kamal were arranging an interview. Because I watched my Jamil and Kamal have a great conversation a couple weeks ago. We've never depicted him in an image, never said he had 2 brains. So whoever came up with that is not an authentic representative of the nation's historical society.
Well, you better get on that Wikipedia page.
Okay, good.
And tell them that, because they seem to think, I don't know who has the authority to
well, I will say this. One time I tried to engage Wikipedia because there was an error on my page and they got mad at me.
Oh, they'll do that. Yep. I mean, you see my page. I mean,
they were calling me all kinds of, like, they were all upset with me. I was like, my bad. It's just me trying to correct. I was like, my fault. I believe it alone.
Yeah, right here. Jacob, YAKUB _ Nation of Islam. Jacob, there's a picture by Malachi Z York. His holy
Malachi York. Yeah, Malachi. I don't. Yeah.
If he's a renegade, I mean, I don't know. This is an internal issue. It seems like I can't really weigh.
We wouldn't.
That's the picture he drew.
I would encourage you to, as you've been done for us, to check your sources. Check your sources.
I'm just saying. That's
yeah. All right. Yeah, you can't have an authentic picture of a fictional character. That's funny. All right, I like that. We can leave it. We can leave it there. We'll salute Yacoub on the way out.
We'll go to the next time. We'll get this figured out.
Yeah, and between you and Diallo, we have the best conversations about these. I'm just used to this is a mess. Barrett, sincerely, thank you very much for coming through again. Congratulations on the memoir. I can't wait to get back into finishing it and to talk with you again. And definitely look forward to again our forthcoming conversations and this presentation you're giving. But thank you very much again. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Adios.
All right. Take good care, Barrett. Peace, 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 because we know you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. Thanks again to Barrett and to everybody for coming through. There is one thing that I went back and saw my notes. I was confused at the beginning of my own notes that I wanted to quickly clear up before we get out of here fully. But in reference to the mall shooting that I brought up at the beginning, part of where I was going with my notes here was that the reporting is that a young man, 17 years old, was shot in the head over a dispute, an argument. And one of the thoughts I had, which led me to these notes that I didn't, was just thinking, it just had a moment of reflection, and how many times so many of us have been in some sort of altercation that could have gone left like that and didn't. And I had a list here. I just wanted to thank all of those who gave me passes, because there had certainly, when I was 17, 18, really up until my mid-20s, there were a number of passes. I feel like I gave a few, admittedly. I feel like a couple people could owe me a debt of thanks and gratitude, but I definitely owe a few people who would have had every right, I think, philosophically, not to go this far. Although it should never go this far, obviously. But my point is, I just want, and so I've mentioned before, I've never forgotten this incident when I was in the Navy in Trieste, Italy, in some bar I had no business being in, saying things to a woman I had no business saying, and she was with her man. They gave me a pass. And to this day, thank you. Because I was so it's one of the lowest points of my adult life. And I remember it more often than I'd care to admit. And what I said was so out of pocket and came from such a place of self-doubt and low self-esteem and fear and sadness and isolation. And yet in a drunken state, it came out as a hostile lashing out and arrogance that could have, and at points I've even thought should have, resulted in some violent punishment that I was given a pass on. So that definitely, the night, whoever you are, so to those that Italian couple, 1992, Trieste, Italy. Oh, I was mourning the death of our father. Oh, he had just passed away that summer. I mean, I was out there drunk for one of the first few times after that. Oh, not an excuse, but that's where I was. Gave me a pass. That night I'm bartending. This would have been 97. I don't know. I'm bartending at the Alamo, PG County, driving home. And I have to admit this too, ignorantly, foolishly driving home, having bartended all night, drinking all night, driving myself home 2, 3 in the morning, just on so many levels, making many mistakes. And a car was stopped at a light and somebody behind me honks. And in the middle of where were we? Kenilworth Avenue. I get out of the car, angrily walk up to a car with tinted windows, can't even see in the car, pitch black at night, PG County. And I'm getting out what they see is, I don't know what I identified as, but they see I was bigger than too. So I'm like 6'2", 270, 275, burling out of the car. They never opened the door. They never let their window down. I'm over there cussing them out, daring them to get out the car, all kinds of stupid stuff. They didn't do anything. Let me get back in the car and go home safely. Salute to you. Thank you. I've never forgotten that incident. It's in my top 3 of these that passes I was given. And then the other one that I have often made fun of, but is, I think, to that Navy SEAL. Early 90s as well. Over a dispute in a hot ass room, no air conditioning, 100 degrees, trying to watch TV. We have a dispute over the TV. He says something smart. I stand up on him. Arr, 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 arr. All he did was look at me with this. I'll never forget the look either. It was a look like just the smile of a confident knowing, you don't want me to move. You don't want me to get up out this chair. And I just sat there. Salute. Thank you. My point is, in all of that, I just feel terrible having, admittedly, that it's right down the street from where I live, reading about it being a 17-year-old and reading about it being a dispute that ends up in somebody getting shot, when I know I have been in way too many of those and have precipitated way too many of those in the history in my own life, and was given passes to be here today. I think we should all give passes, and then we should all think about our actions that precipitate the need for us to be given passes. And then we have to recognize that a lot of young people are out here running around hurt, damaged, in pain, being misled, being under-resourced, being encouraged to this. I feel terrible. I do. I feel terrible. But yeah, I think about those 3 incidents, and there are more, but those 3 at the top a lot. I think about them a lot. And then I do try to think about it in terms of those that I let a few go. There's some people out there, you owe me some thanks too. So that's what I didn't even understand my own notes, but that's what my notes were. Yeah, that's why I don't go out the house. The 9 lives. I mean, I again, to think about that this man is the young man was 17. He deserved a pass. I don't know anything about what happened, but I'm almost certain he deserved a pass. How many things could possibly have occurred where a pass is really not deserved? And someone would actually have deserved to get their life taken. The percentage for that has got to be really small. It's got to be really small. I don't know how many I got left. Probably just the one. That's why I don't leave the house. That's why I'm very careful. That's why I don't get into. That's why I try to remember. That's why I remember these passes. When that energy starts coming up, that anger starts to bubble up. And then I thank people. I'm very grateful. That Italian couple in particular. Good Lord. Oh man. And whoever was in that car, I don't know who was in that car. Because I mean, even a semi, not even a fully legit thug, a semi thug would have had all they would have needed to roll down that window and get busy. And then I almost that would have been a Darwin Award, that the dresser moving furniture, the dresser hits me. You know what I mean? After all of that, that's just trying to avoid that kind of stuff at this point. Diallo was probably I don't know much about sports. That's a bar. That's the funniest thing all day. Diallo was the one in the car. Doc Jam, I know you're an atheist, but I've said multiple times, but some spiritual forces intervened in these run-ins. I know it's not your thing, though. Look, I'm not mad at you. I can't explain it. I can't explain it. But yeah, that was hilarious. Diallo was probably in the car. Yeah, but my memoir, after reading even some of Barrett's, I don't know, man. I'm ready to put the pen down on mine. It's like it's anticlimactic. Although there's some interesting similarities. I never got to the needles, but Barrett and I, we have definitely overlapped and paralleled on some of that abuse of the substances. And I get it. That's why he interrupts me so much, because he was like, I gave you a pass that night. And I can't even imagine what that person must have seen. I should not have been driving either. That's the other thing. But to get out drunk, again, I'm this big, angry, just out the car, mad as hell. Brother Jamil, apparently good Lord believes in you, whether you I heard that. Hey. Diallo clutched the pearls and passengers. Oh, oh man, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. All right, listen, good people. Please do continue to like, share, subscribe, support our Patreon. We're almost out the wilderness. Thank you all for coming through this morning, and those who will see and hear this later. Thanks to you as well. Thanks again to Barrett. Please do. The link is in the show description if you're interested, and if again, I haven't finished it, but I highly, even just so far, I highly recommend the book. And if for no other reason, first of all, it's very well written. Dude can write. And so it's a very well written memoir. And then when you get to the stuff about the politics and the journalism and the cyber industrial intelligence industrial complex and all of that, it's and then I have to say again, for me, I think, I don't know, I find some importance to think about what the state does. On some level, I think we rationalize when we see things done to Black and brown people. We're like, yeah, I mean, we kind of expect, I don't know if you all feel the same way, but it's like, I feel like Black and brown people recognize indigenous people, well, for them differently, but they recognize that this thing is not really ours. And all this stuff, we built this country and all of that. Yeah. But it wasn't built for us. It wasn't for us. It wasn't FUBU, maybe boo. It was for them by us. But we know it's not. But when you see the salt of the white earth, white boy from Texas, although he was not middle class, he was lower class. He was struggling a little bit. But even then, when you see, but Aaron Schwartz, white middle class, Stanford, when you see what happens to them, and as he said about Michael Hastings, and I used to joke about this. I'd like that for white men in particular, the psychological downfall must be the most precipitous in confronting what this country really is, because they get taught from day one, like with for real, like, this is yours. God for you. And then when they see it's not giving them what you're supposed to, wait a minute, it's not like that. It's not like that. It's like the fall. But to see what the state did to them, it's like, damn. And they weren't even on some socialist armed struggle. They were on some freedom of information. Stop spying on us every 5 seconds. Can we, I mean, Aaron Schwartz, fundamentally, can we turn over the production, the intellectual production of society over to the people and stop warehousing the intellectual production that we all collectively produce in providing a society and institutions that train and teach people to become the scholars, to produce the work, that they then have the work they produce housed and owned and controlled and only reviewable by a tiny segment of society. That was fundamentally what Aaron Schwartz was. And that led the state to come collapse down on them like that. I mean, damn. That's where I think these stories become that much more important. Maybe not more important, but where their importance is elevated, in my humble estimation, that it's a reminder that at the end of the day, this state is vicious. So anyway, salute to everybody. Salute to all of you. Thanks again. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And I will catch you next time right here on
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
What do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.